Foreign Minister Skarp-Petersen, thank you very much for sitting down with RT.
Well, it's a pleasure.
Iceland has recovered remarkably well following the 2008 global financial crisis. Can you briefly describe to me how Iceland came out of the circumstance they found themselves in 2008?
Well, you're right. We were the first country down during the crisis, but we were also the first country up. And what cut us apart from the rest of the countries in Europe that were in problems was the fact that we made an economic plan with the IMF and we stuck to the plan. We stayed the course, we took all the difficult decisions and we didn't budge. But, you know, we went a little bit a different way than the European countries. Instead of just adopting austerity measures, we also raised taxes quite a lot, meaning that the state had much greater income, so it was made it able to pay the debts. And then, of course, we also put some money into infrastructure projects to stimulate the economy. So we went a mixed path, really. That is what was different between us and Europe.
But considering the turmoil in the EU economy, which may go into a recession now, would Iceland be better off just staying away from the European Union?
I don't think so.
You don't think so?
I'm pretty convinced that the EU and Eurozone will go through their present difficulties and will sail through the rough seas. And in the end, I believe that the euro will be a stronger currency than before. And you already see that it more than holds its own, for example, against the American dollar during the, well, in the end, at the end of August, for example, it was 6.5% stronger than the dollar. So I think it is a currency that will prevail. In Iceland, you have this special situation that we are probably the smallest nation with an independent currency. And in the globalized world that we find ourselves, I mean, if you're a small country with very little independent currency, you become like a prey that is attacked by all these sharks, all the hedge funds. So therefore, a lot of Icelanders, they think that in future there will be shelter within Eurozone. That is what we really are seeking.
Really?
Oh, yes. But mind you, this is something that will be, it's a decision that will be taken by the people as a whole in a referendum. We've already put in an application. So what we are seeking by joining the European Union is a greater currency area with greater stability, lower rates, and hopefully better shelter for another crisis that may loom in future for Europe and the world.
Iceland let 4 of its big banks fall in 2008, but supported key sectors of its economy. Europe is doing the exact opposite right now. It is forging out aid to the ailing banking system while imposing austerity measures on the people. Why isn't the European Union learning from Iceland's experience?
Well, the big countries, probably it's a kind of arrogance. The big countries, the big confederations never look at the small fish in the pond and ask themselves, why are they doing well? But what we did, what was completely opposite to the Eurozone countries and to EU, even to the United States, is that we didn't socialize the losses. We didn't let the taxpayers shoulder the burden. What we did was to let the bondholders, those that took risks, go away with their losses. But we did another thing. We sheltered the average person. That is to say, the state guaranteed the deposits of the individuals.
So you put the people first before the corporations and banks?
That's what we did, yes.
That's what you did?
That's what we do in Iceland.
That sounds pretty nice, pretty considerate.
It worked for us. It worked for us. And in the end, I mean, only 4 years after the crisis, you know, when the world completely wrote off Iceland, what you see, a small country that is doing well, we have the highest rate of growth in Europe now. The new figures showing that the growth in Iceland is 3.5%, projected to be that in the same area for the next 2 years. Unemployment is down to 4.5%.
4.5?
4.5, yes. So, I mean, it is working. The Icelandic system is working.
Do you think that the European Union will survive with all of its current members, or do you think some will have to be offloaded? Greece?
I think it will survive. And I'll tell you why I think Greece, as you put it so eloquently, will not be offloaded, because it will be so expensive for Europe. It will be very expensive for some of the richer countries of Eurozone. So I think people will just count the sums and come to the conclusion that it will be easier, cheaper to save Greece. And I think that is what will happen.
Iceland is one of the key players in the Arctic region that is estimated to hold 30% of the world's undiscovered gas deposits and 13% of the world's undiscovered oil deposits. Could the Arctic become the new Middle East just a few decades from now?
Perhaps not a new Middle East, but I'm certain that the Arctic contains a lot of untapped reserves. And if you just think about Iceland and the future of Iceland, then I think that within perhaps 12 or 20 years, you will have 3 oil fields north of Iceland. One within the Icelandic economic zone. And that's one which the Norwegians that know this business pretty well have suggested may be huge. So I think definitely in the Arctic you will see a lot of new wealth drawn from in the future. That will be to the benefit of countries like yours, like Russia, like Iceland, like Greenland, possibly the Faroes as well, and some others. But it isn't only opportunity. I mean, if you look at Iceland, we are placed, so to speak, in the affluent of the Arctic Ocean. And some of these fields are exactly in the areas where the currents are born that go between Iceland and Greenland. So let's just think for a moment about what happened in the Gulf of Mexico. Christ, if that would happen north of Iceland at the extreme low temperature where oil doesn't degrade naturally, where the catalyst do not work, it would be a catastrophe. So we have to tread very, very carefully. But the answer is yes. I think a lot of nations will draw quite a lot of wealth from the Arctic.
How do you respond to recent reports of Chinese investors becoming increasingly interested in leasing land in Iceland? And what do you think China's involvement in the region will mean geopolitically?
Well, the Icelanders have not reacted very positively in the end. First, they thought this was a very nice interest. They welcomed this interest, and China, like Russia, has always treated Iceland with respect, been our friends in the past, even offered us assistance, like Russia did during our crisis. I think there's a lot of apprehension now by the Icelanders about China. This is probably and possibly fed by external media that all seem to be afraid on Iceland's behalf. But what will happen is that there will be a new traffic route across the Arctic, definitely. And China is looking at that because it will cut the costs of transporting Chinese goods from Asia to Europe by 40%. So in Iceland, there is a lot of interest in certain areas to work with Chinese on developing this route. In the future, I think you will see that anyway. However things develop, Iceland will be one of the stepping stones between Asia and Europe when the ice has melted in such a manner that you will have a new cargo route. And that will be pretty soon, I predict, perhaps within some decades.
2 years ago, Iceland came up with something called the Modern Media Initiative. It's a legal framework to promote investigative journalism. Considering the fact that Iceland and you yourself have become the victim of WikiLeaks, what's in it for Iceland to promote such a legal framework?
Well, I wouldn't phrase it the way you do it, that Iceland became a victim of WikiLeaks. But you're talking,
how would you rephrase?
Well, I mean, you're talking to a guy who certainly saw a confidential report made by the American embassy on him, splashed on the pages of the media. Actually, the WikiLeaks group made their first trial run with documents that related to Iceland because they had some particular connection to Icelandic individual. But in the end, this resulted in this bill of legislation that is being proposed in the Icelandic parliament, and that has been embraced to a certain extent by all sides of the house. I mean, Iceland at least tries to be a partner that wants to be transparent, but this doesn't mean that we want to be a haven for illegal things, not at all. But what we're trying to do, or this bill that was sponsored by an individual MP, is trying to lay a groundwork for a cooperation between nations where it is easier to blow the whistle, to publish things that might be negative for individual institutions or governments, but nevertheless good for the society as a whole. I mean, for example, if you have corruption within government, I think it is positive that it should be put out in the open. That's the angle I take on it, but it hasn't been passed as yet.
Foreign Minister Skarphéðinsson, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.